Come on, Darren Sproles. Aww. Alright, I'm gonna lose by 1 point.
Feels good.
So you guys are talking about new cards, right? You were playing proxy decks with the new cards?
What?
And that's what you were playing with your friends, with proxy decks with new cons cards?
What?
Yeah, you've been talking about it for a while, this guy beat that guy, and where I mistake you guys' fantasy football talk for Magic, because I have no idea anything about fantasy football, but...
I don't know anything about fantasy football either.
You've been talking about it for, forever.
That's all I know about what I just told you.
See, this could be funny if you guys just play along ever.
The In Response podcast is brought to you by ShatterPause.com.
Hello everyone, and welcome to In Response, a podcast where we bring you our take on what's going on around the world in Magic the Gathering. I'm Brian Kim, and I'm your host. I'm joined by my colleague, Simon Gao.
Howdy, y'all. It's a pleasure to be here.
And Brando Gross.
Hey, everyone.
Alright, so we're just about to get started with our new standard format right after rotation. So it's basically what we're going to be talking about here. So let's start off with a little bit about what we expect after the rotation happens. And let's start off with Rabble Master. So Goblin Rabble Master is a card that has been sweeping across standard right now. I think it actually recently won, Rabble Red won the most recent SCG Open. So... and people are expecting it to do really well in the next standard. It's like $10 now? It used to be 25 cents. So, it's expected to do really well. But, do you guys think that's going to be the case?
Rabble Master is a very real card, and even though last format was a very interesting, it was a very unique format, and maybe Rabble Master was only good because it was just that format, but I don't think so. I think in reality, Rabble Master is the real deal, and it's just going to continue to surprise us as time goes on and just be better than we expect.
I don't know. Any 3-drop that literally gets beat by Grizzly Bears isn't something I ever get excited about. Goblin Rabble Master isn't unfair and limited because you play Grizzly Bears there. And just because of that, maybe I played against a bunch in draft, but it just doesn't feel that impactful when you're actually just playing creatures. It's a little bit better against control decks or the black control. It's pretty good against the mono black devotion decks, which is kind of the control deck, and the blue white control decks right now. But those decks are being gutted pretty hard, and if we're moving toward a format where we're playing more creature decks, I'm assuming the creature decks will be playing something better than a Grizzly Bear for 2. So Goblin Rabble Master will probably be shut down even harder.
The idea with Rabble Master is partly that, because you have an aggro deck, you basically are able to put on pressure early with your 1-drops and 2-drops. Then once your Rabble comes down, it's going to keep on creating tokens. And if you can't deal with these tokens and the earlier pressure, then you're going to lose. Because, it's just basically you have so many creatures that you really need to block, even if Rabble himself isn't attacking. And by itself, it's also good because, it provides a big creature if you need it, and the tokens to just attack. People are a lot of times really happy just attacking with the tokens and not attacking with Rabble himself.
That's true, but as Simon said, if your opponent just has a Grizzly Bears, then if you're just going to have a token every turn, then it's just going to get eaten. However, the idea is that if you can have a bunch of other creatures in play already and be adding to the board in addition to the Rabble Master, if you can't find an opening or force an opening for your Rabble Master to get in for tons of damage, you can still support you can still use the 1/1 goblins that you get to just augment whatever forces you already have. So I think if you're going to be playing him, you have to be an aggressive or at least a mid-range sort of on the aggressive side deck. But if you are, he is just going to be really, really, really good.
I don't know. It just feels weird to me, just a card that's good but not great and limited being one of the better standard constructed cards for a year. That just feels wrong to me.
I think you're underrating Rabble Master a little bit here.
Have you played Rabble Master in Limited, Simon?
I've played against it. It's fun. You just play a Grizzly Bear. It's actually not that hard to play against.
I've heard a lot of stories of people getting completely destroyed by Rabble Master in Limited. And to
That's
be
'cause
fair,
people don't like playing Grizzly Bears as much as I do.
okay, well, people in Standard don't like playing Grizzly Bears either, so...
Hopefully they'll be playing something better than Grizzly Bears, so it will be even less of a problem.
But those things that are better than Grizzly Bears might be a 3-1 with some other ability that doesn't actually stonewall the 1-1s.
Well then, maybe they should be playing Grizzly Bears instead. Like, you get my point though, it's just...
Well, I mean, just because it's not good in limited doesn't mean it can't be good in standard. I mean, for example, we had stuff like Satyr Fire Dancer or whatever. Fire Drinker Satyr?
No,
the 2-1 that does damage to itself.
Fire Drinker Satyr. But Satyr Fire Dancer
Satyr
is also a good example.
But yeah, I mean, like, those cards are cards you need, the support of the other cards. I mean,
I know, but like those are like good like role players, but like you're talking about a card that like you're literally building a deck around, and which at $10 you're hyping up to be like one of the format defining cards of the upcoming standard. I think that's a little much for a card that actually isn't even that impressive in a limited format.
I mean, there are plenty of cards that you build a deck around, but that aren't that impressive and limited. And you should believe me, even though I can't think of any examples right now. But
Deathrat Shaman?
Yeah, look at that. Deathrat. It's not even good in standard.
Like, Goblin Rebel Master isn't doing anything like interesting. It's just like making creatures and attacking with creatures. Like,
I mean, what he's doing is he's an army in a can that doesn't require you to, attack with him just to make the army. And he's like a very fast clock if left alone. That's what he is, and that's just insane. It's really good.
Yeah, but like, even in limited, just like, whatever, I'll just play something on turn 2.
But the thing is, you can't just put 2 drops in a control deck because then they'll be dead late and you're a control deck. You can't afford to necessarily do that.
Well, yeah, but the idea is that the idea behind these Rabble Red decks is that you have like turn 1 a 2/1, turn 2 maybe like 2 2/1s or like a 2-drop creature.
If I can build a limited deck to handle Goblin Rabble Master, I better hope that I can construct a standard deck that will be able to deal with Goblin Rabble Master as well. Like, doesn't seem like that much of a challenge to do.
There's so many standard decks, like constructed decks, that you build that don't look anything like limited decks. There's a reason that control decks don't just have random bears in them. It's because it makes you weaker against other decks in the format. So just the fact that the fact that you live in just a normal constructed format with diversity, rogue decks, control decks, and mid-range decks means that you can't afford to play the cards that just completely hose it in the main deck.
Well, no, and the idea is that, a bear by itself might hose Rebel Master in a draft setting, but in a standard setting, it won't, because it has the other support cards around it.
But at the same time, like, you'll have... It's not a pack rat. It's not just a creation demon that are, like, hard to deal with. Like, the answer to Goblin Rebel Master is very easy to find.
I mean, it's the same thing with Desecration Demon. You just point a removal spell at it. It was still
or you just have creatures to sack, like, tokens or something.
I mean,
like
that's
that.
not... Like, I mean...
So, I mean, like, I think Desecration Demon is actually a decent comparison.
Oh, no, but, like, the range of cards that deal with Desecration Demon is much more narrow than the cards that could possibly deal with Goblin Rabble Master. Dealing with Goblin Rabble Master is literally any creature with power 2 or greater and toughness 2 or greater.
The thing is, you can take some damage from Desecration Demon, kill it, and then be on your way. Rebel will leave like 2 to 3 1/1s behind, and that doesn't
2 to
seem
3
that
is
big.
being aggressive.
It doesn't.
Well, no, the idea behind Rebel Master isn't that it by itself, it just gets blocked. The idea is it keeps on creating tokens, and with the previous pressure that you have already, that constant pressure of token making is going to put you over the top, especially if you have something like Hall of Triumph out. And, if you manage to, clear the way, then Rebel Master can maybe attack in. So Rebel Master is good on its own against stuff like blue-white control right now. Or it can just be a constant source of tokens, which keeps up the pressure from the early game that you had.
So basically, if you're afraid of overextending, he's really good, because you just play him and that's it. But if you're not afraid of overextending, he's really good, because you play him and a bunch of other stuff, and then the 1/1s are really good. So he's good whether your opponent is going to wrath your board or he's not.
Right, so, I mean, it's just that, the limit argument's a little bit off, because the idea is that the decks are constructed very differently, and you can build your deck with Rabble in mind. I mean, obviously, Rabble Master is doing very well. I mean, Rabble Red won the most recent SCG Open. I mean, of course, this is going to be a very different standard environment once rotation happens, and that's kind of, the idea behind it. Like, what will happen to Rabble after, because it is losing some of the support cards, like Legion Loyalist. I mean, is the idea that, Rabble Master will kind of go out of favor, but we also have to keep in mind that red decks tend to do really well in the beginning of a standard format. All right, well, so let's move on then to a different topic, and we have seen a fair amount of devotion decks in this past standard. We saw basically every single devotion deck that we can possibly see except for white. We saw black devotion, red devotion, blue devotion, and green devotion. And they're kind of out of favor mostly except for black devotion. But it seems like they're kind of going to go out of style with Khans of Tarkir. We're losing a lot of the hybrid mana cost cards from Return to Ravnica.
I'm just going to say how I find it very amusing that the monocolored decks are taking a big hit because a multicolored set is rotating out.
That's just the nature of hybrid. Hybrid's a crazy mechanic.
No, it is. I just find it very amusing.
No, that is fair.
Like, Return to Ravnica block was just like hardcore gold colors, and now all the colored decks are sad because it's rotating out.
Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, also part of it is because of the of M14. Most of the decks are kind of losing something from M14, like Tidebinder Mage, like Lifebane Zombie, stuff like that.
I mean, it's just because the power level of Return to Ravnica was so high that just losing that block is a pretty big blow to the power level of Standard.
Have you seen the power level of some of these wedge-colored cards, dude?
I see a lot of 3-colored costed cards, which, I don't know, seems hard to cast.
Well, I mean, our fixing is going to be a lot better now.
Yeah, but it's a bit optimistic to think you're going to be playing all this stuff on
Our fixing is going to be a lot better
curve.
now with shocks rotating out.
Yeah, like the fixing is worse.
Yeah, I mean, but there is the fixing for it. I mean, we're going to have like all sorts of dual lands. We're going to have the refuges, the new refuges, the fetch lands, the tricolor lands, the temples, the pain lands. Like, there's so many different, like, you could have so many different ways to build your land base.
Yeah. The mana fixing in this format is not, I don't know, it's maybe not as good as Innistrad Return to Ravnica, but it's certainly good enough to do a lot of the things that people are going to want to do.
It's a lot of coming to play tapped, whereas none of, like, the fixing in Return to Ravnica or Innistrad wasn't coming to play tapped, which is a really big difference. It's a big difference.
If you want to play a deck where you need to hit your cards on curve, like, an aggro deck or something like that, you can play Pain Lands, Mana Confluence, and Fetch Lands. If you want to play a deck where you want to get, squeeze out extra value from your lands, you can play Tri-Lands and Scry-Lands and like, Refuges. But it's up to you. Like, you have a lot of options in this format.
I think if you're doing a tricolor deck, like, on the back of coming to play tapped lands, you're gonna be very sad against the aggro decks that actually have enough fixing to, like, be pretty consistent. Right? The 2-color aggro has consistency in the upcoming standard with, like, the Pain Lands and Mana Confluence. Something that, like, the more slowy, dirtily, like, 3-mana, like, mid-rangey decks don't really have as much access to.
So what you're saying is that you kind of expect the aggro decks to do better once rotation happens.
If people are trying to play, like, 3-color Dirtle, yes.
But what if they're 3-color Dirtling with an aggro deck?
Then it's either not
Wait,
aggro
what?
or
Dirtling
not
with
Dirtle.
an aggro deck?
Okay, maybe not Dirtle, but look, I think that there are cool options for playing, a 3-color aggro deck, because you can play Mana Confluence, Pain Lands, and Fetch Lands to make sure that all of your lands mostly come into play on
No,
tap.
like, I think aggro decks have the fixing they want. It's the non-aggro 3-color decks that don't feel like they would always get there in terms of their mana.
Right, I mean, before, when we had, the 3-color control decks or something, they had something like a Supreme Verdict that they can rely on. Turn 4, maybe 5, depending on if the temples came in tapped or something like that, that they could clear the board with. It's not going to get countered. It's a 4-mana Wrath. We don't have a 4-mana Wrath in the standard anymore. We have a 5-mana Wrath, and it's counterable. So,
And there's a 1-mana spell that can counter it in the format.
right.
Like, on turn 5, they spend a mana, they counter it, game over.
I mean, I definitely think there's something to be said for the deck that can get that Wrath out as soon as possible. So, if there's a deck that's just like, I'm going to play some mana and ramp myself up to end hostilities, I think that could be pretty powerful.
What mana ramp is there in standard right now outside of like creatures that would die?
The problem is
Wrath?
all of the best ramp in standard right now, and almost all of it is just creatures. The only ramp that you can play that's not a creature starts at 3 mana, or there's the one...
Font of Fertility?
Yeah, there's Font of Fertility, and then there's also the creature. For 1 blue mana, you get an 0/3, and he has Rampant Growth on him. You get to sack him. So you're definitely limited. Your options are really limited if you're going to try and ramp without mana guys. But I mean, honestly, even if you are going to play a mana guy and use that to ramp into a Wrath, like that's definitely a viable strategy. What you need to do is just be reliably hitting your Wrath on turn 5 or turn 4 or whatever.
It's viable. It doesn't feel good, especially since Thoughtseize is also in the format.
That is true. The fact that it can be countered or Thoughtseize just makes, having your Wrath as a plan a lot more difficult.
Right, but I mean, just because we have because our only like unconditional quote unquote Wrath is at 5 doesn't mean we have answers at lower converted mana cost. There's Anger of the Gods, there's Drown in Sorrows to answer the aggro decks, and this is kind of like what Wizards were trying to build in terms of a format where they have kind of conditional Wrath effects at 3 mana cost and something like a Destroy All Creatures effect at 5 converted mana cost. So. I mean, it just seems like Control is going to be a little bit different now. The question is it going to be good in terms of the metagame once rotation happens?
I think what you were saying means that it's hard for there to be like a dedicated Control deck that's built to like answer any deck in the format. Because there's like very specific cards that you need against very specific decks in order to like have a good matchup against them. Where, like, Anger of the Gods, like, to me, isn't as much of a card that you jam in a Control deck as you do in, like, a red-green mid-range deck, where all your other creatures have more than 3 toughness. Right?
Well, besides maybe, like, Caryatids and Elfish Mystics.
Sure, but, like, it dodges, like, it fills a gap that the rest of the deck can, easily deal with, right? As long as you deal with the aggro, like, the big green creatures will deal with the rest. Whereas, like, having, like, these very conditional answers makes it really awkward on Control decks to make sure they can, like, have a plan against every deck. Right?
I mean, I think that Control is going to be viable in the new format. I just don't know if it's going to look the same as it usually looks. Like, what we've seen is these sort of all answers decks that's just like, I'm going to try and keep myself alive and 1-for-1 you, and then maybe, Wrath, and then eventually I'll draw Sphinx's Revelation. Like, that's not really how we can do things anymore because we don't have Sphinx's Revelation. I think that, like more a black-white build could be good where you have, draw spells and Read the Bones and Bitter Revelation, Wraths and Drown in Sorrow for the faster decks, and End Hostilities for the bigger, more, like, mid-range decks, and, you could still play Hero's Downfall, you could still play Bile Blight for the aggro decks or Farika's Cure, you have stuff like Elspeth at the top end. Like, there's definitely going to be a place for Control in the new meta. It's just going to be different than we've seen since Sphinx's Revelation was released.
Right, and we kind of saw that a little bit. I mean, the mono black Devotion or black white or black green or whatever was a Control deck in its essence already. I mean, it had creatures like, Pack Rat, Desecration Demon, stuff like that. But, I mean, it relied on stuff like, Thoughtseize, Hero's Downfall, some card draw with, like, Underworld Connections or Read the Bones or something like that, and just using that to kind of control the game and, have these hard-to-deal-with creatures like Desecration Demon or Pack Rat. So, I mean, so it seems like what you're saying is it's kind of like it's going to go towards more of the black deck direction rather than the blue-white direction.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is that we were talking about how monocolor devotion decks really are kind of dead now because we're just losing so many devotion enablers. Like, if we talk about one of the best ones that was in the format, the mono blue devotion, we're losing Tidebinder Mage, we're losing Nightveil Spectre, we're losing Cloudfin Raptor and Judge's Familiar. So, like, without things to fill those slots, it's much more difficult to make the cards like Thassa and Master of Waves really as powerful as they can be. But the thing is, like, the black devotion deck, it didn't run on powerful creatures and the gods. Like, it was more.
It ran on Pack Rat and Desecration Demon.
Yes, I mean, it didn't rely on its devotion, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it relied on Pack Rat and Desecration Demon.
Well, losing the devotion enablers in mono black is not as big a deal. Like, sure, Grey Merchant.
They weren't devotion enablers; they were the win conditions of the deck.
But there weren't.
Well, I mean,
there
Grey
weren't
Merchant did
devotion-
work.
Grey Merchant did some work, but it was Desecration Demon Pack Rat. Those were the two cards of the
Even
deck.
if you talk about black white or black green or black splashing blue, I mean, some of those decks didn't even play Grey Merchant, so it's like not that big a deal that the devotion is leaving. But I still think that the main black deck that we've seen for a while is not going to be as viable now, because like before we were able to play a mix of like 4 or 5 different removal spells, most of which were 2 mana. Well, now you got Murderous Cut, you got Bile Blight, you got Pharika's Cure, and everything else is 3 mana or more. So if you're going to be playing a black mid-range deck, like, first of all, you've lost your best mid-range creatures, like, you know, Desecration Demon and Pack Rat, which were wont to win games by themselves. And second of all, the removal is just not there. So, I mean, I definitely think that black devotion decks have gone are going to be, you know, similarly to blue devotion decks, are going to have issues because they're losing a lot of tools, but it's not always the same tools.
One thing I'm interested to see if the multicolored cards are going to see more play come rotation. Because, like, as we said, the monocolored decks are powering down a lot. And if we're going to be playing multiple colors in the next standard, it automatically makes the multicolored gods, like, just a little bit better in that you'll be more consistent in maybe turning them on. So I'm interested to see how those pan out.
Well, the thing about multicolored gods, and just gods in general, is a lot of times, besides Thassa, most of the benefit was from just having them on the field, like Perforos. I mean, Mono Red was able to turn on Perforos occasionally, but it got a lot of benefit from just having Perforos there, or Keranos most recently. I mean, Keranos' effect is why you have them there. I mean,
but like, they're good if you don't turn them on, but having the ability to turn them on is like a real part of deck construction, because like you can just steal games that way, right?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, like, it may not be the main reason that you're playing them, but if you don't have that opportunity, the sort of hidden value of sometimes you just get, like, a huge advantage in a random game because you have some stuff out, like, those, they lose a lot of value.
Well, I mean, the thing is, with the multicolored gods, they require so much devotion that
they require one more pip of devotion than the monocolored gods.
One more, that's it.
It's just one more.
Yeah, but we're losing a lot of the enablers.
Well, what we're losing is the monocolor enablers. Cards like Tidebinder Mage that gave you 2 of the same color. But we still have a good number of the cards that give you different colors. I mean, and we're getting a bunch of new ones in the new set because it is a wedge set. They have to have cards to fit in multiple different wedges. Cards like Rakshasa Death Dealer, or what I'm more excited about is the Warden of the Edge and of the Scale. I don't know if it's Warden, but Chief of the Edge, Chief of the Scale. They're just cards that are black-white, and they're efficient, and even potentially, like, you know, they're lords. They give warriors bonuses. So, like, if you wanted to build, like, a black-white a deck, you know, with Athreos as your god, you could build, you know, 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops that have almost all the possible pips of devotion, and then potentially actually turn Athreos on in a good number of games. And, of course, it's just a card that's very powerful on its own when you're playing a deck with tons of 1s and 2-drops in it.
It's just going to be a lot easier finding cards that fill up 2 pips for the multicolored gods and fill up 2 pips for the single colored gods once your turnaround rotates out.
Yeah, because
Which
you can play
has to be a big deal in terms of the playability of the multicolored gods.
You can play any remaining white or black cards, or, like, you know, whatever either color of your god of choice, but you can also play the cards that are both.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit. I mean, Brandon kind of alluded to this a little bit with his black-white deck that he just talked about right now, the Chief of Scale and Chief of Edge one. But what do you guys think are possibilities then for decks post-rotation? Like, for example, I know that a lot of people have been trying to build a sort of dredge, delve-like deck where they fill their own graveyard with maybe stuff like Sultai Ascendancy, Commune with the Gods, Satyr Wayfinder, stuff like that, and then use the very strong delve cards to get, you know, some very cheap for their cost creatures and stuff like that afterwards. So I mean, that's a deck that's possible. There's the Mardu deck with stuff like Goblin Rabblemaster. There's I don't know, there's like a Jeskai deck, stuff like that. So and Temur monsters, obviously. So what do you guys think are going to be big players in terms of these clans? Then these decks built around the clans.
I'm really excited to see maybe like a Jeskai Burn deck where you're kind of doing the same thing as the Burn deck from last format, where you've got a lot of removal, but it also can go to the face. So sometimes you just get one of those draws where you're just like, you better have like 3 counter spells, or I just have 20 damage in my hand. So it's got that potential, but it's also just sort of a tempo-y kind of like kill that, kill that, kill that. Eventually get like a Chandra's Phoenix going, which is rotating. But I think that if you wanted to play, Jeskai Burn, you could play Jeskai Charm. You can play. There's a lot of burn in the new set. And there's the Ashclad Phoenix. I think Jeskai Burn. Even though we're losing a lot of the best cards from the old red-white burn deck, we still get to keep cards like Chain to the Rocks and there's a lot of really good new cards coming in the Jeskai clan for us to take advantage of. I think it could be a really cool deck.
I also think that deck might be one of the better decks to use the blue Delve cards in, because if you're just like playing all like these cycling cards, or you're actually like actively dumping your hand, like that's where like Delve draw 3 cards becomes really good.
Yeah, if you could just, kill that, kill that, kill that, kill that, pay 3 mana to draw 3 cards. Like, it's just, like, definitely a good place for that sort of effect.
Alright, so, I mean, this seems like an interesting deck. Any other decks that you think could have a real place in the next standard?
Well, I think that, I've heard people talking about the Delve deck a lot, where you're like, oh, I'm going to play these black Delve cards, and I'm going to play some cards to put these in my graveyard. But honestly, if you ask me, I think that the best place for Delve is in a black-white list, because if you can take all the cards that are in black and then white and put them together...
What Delve cards are in white?
Well, there aren't any Delve cards in white, but it's still you can still come up with, you can play like the black Delve cards with white enablers, because black-white's such a good color combination, and so...
So what you're kind of saying is something like a control deck with like the black and white removal cards, and that'll fill your graveyard, and that'll enable stuff like Empty the Pits or something like that.
Yeah, I admit that it's pretty awkward that a lot of the white removal doesn't actually fill your graveyard, but I still think it's a cool thing. I mean, look, it's black white. It can't be bad.
But like honestly, like I feel like people tend, I from what I've seen so far, people are tending to overestimate how many cards you actually need to exile for, like, how much they have to work around Delve to make Delve good. Like, Delve just winds up being valuable because there are cards in your graveyard over the course of a Magic game. And they're not doing anything. You might as well exile them and cast this card that is now undercosted.
But, I mean, for cards like Necropolis Fiend, which requires a steady stream of cards in your graveyard, you're going to really need more support. And for cards like Empty the Pits, where you need a lot of cards in your graveyard, because it is XX. You have to pay twice the number of mana and then cards exiled as zombies that you get. So if you want to get any huge number of zombies, you got to have a lot of cards in your graveyard.
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, you do tend to get a ton of cards in your graveyard. I mean, like, I'm one of those people that, kind of lays out the graveyard so that you can see each of the cards as I go. And, like, when I'm playing control decks, I mean, that pile gets, like, really long. So
I mean, it's like how people originally thought Tarmogoyf wasn't going to be any good. Because they're like, in what situation am I going to have an instant, a sorcery, a land, a planeswalker in my graveyard? Like, in what world would that ever happen? And the answer to that is every game of Magic.
The answer is fetch land into Brainstorm.
The answer is every game of Magic will get you there.
I mean, in all
and I think it's just the same thing with Delve. Just like, you don't realize it, but like, cards go through the graveyard a lot more than you think. You just assume they don't because that's not your goal in Magic, so you don't ever think about it.
I mean, in all seriousness, if you take the cards that are, that are synergistic with Delve, cards like Sidisi and Sultai Ascendancy, cards like, See the Unwritten, Satyr Wayfinder, and you put them all in a deck with cards like Nemesis Immortals and like some simple Delve cards like the Necropolis Fiend, which isn't very simple, but the Hooting Mandrill is the 4/4 Trampler that's just 6 mana with Delve, with like Commune with the Gods. Like, if you go full on whole ham, I'm gonna play cards that mill myself in Delve, that is potentially really, really powerful. It definitely seems like the sort of thing that, it has the potential to be great, but then might just not be good enough. But I've heard people talking about, playing that, and it's turning out to be just a very real strategy in the new format.
Well, the issue with that kind of deck, though, is that if the meta becomes too heavily in that kind of deck, then people just start running hate, and there's plenty of graveyard hate
Tormod's
available.
Crypt.
Well, I don't know about plenty. I mean,
Tormod's Crypt
isn't good. Especially against Delve, like, you can't do it in response, so you kind of just have to choose the right time when Tormod's Crypt.
You're talking about a Delve deck that runs not a lot of, like, enablers in order to, like, cheat out, like, these, like, big monstrous things. Like, that's the kind of deck that actually is susceptible to Tormod's Crypt. Because if you just hit their turn you just play Standard Wayfinder turn 2, and then you just Tormod script them. They're like, well, there goes my plan.
I mean,
well, there's also the issue of, is it one of these decks that might be susceptible to Thoughtseize? And it could be, because if you just Thoughtseize out their enablers, then they're stuck with a handful of converted mana cost 6 or higher cards that they can't cast.
Or you Thoughtseize out like their bomb that they want to play, and all they have are crappy enablers that don't really do anything.
that's true. It is something that might be weak to Thoughtseize, but as far as Tormod's Crypt goes, the fact that Tormod's Crypt like only happens once, like, because if you Seder Wayfinder and then they immediately Tormod's Crypt, then you just have like another enabler because you play so many. And if they want to sandbag it, then you can just play your card the next turn because.
But at the same time, like, this Delve deck that you're talking about is very much like a tempo deck, right? And just like putting them behind the tempo just like is actually a decently huge hit. Because you're no longer cheating big things out. You're playing a more fair game, and decks are gonna be more prepared and like be able to deal with a fairer game out of the Delve deck.
Yeah, that's true. Guess we'll just have to see.
Yeah, alright. So that's basically all we have time for. So let's finish off with our last thoughts then. Brando, your last thoughts?
New Broodmate Dragon. Is that what that was called? Broodmate Dragon?
Are you talking about the white creature that
The
puts
Wingmate
a 3/4?
Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's awesome. It's not as good as Archangel of Thune, but it's the new Broodmate Dragon, and it's awesome.
Alright, Simon?
Just go for life. Holla. America. That was very
France.
just guy.
It's
Thank
also
you.
the colors of France.
If I remember
best.
correctly, you were saying a few weeks ago that you would never use Jeskai, and you would always use America for those color combinations.
America.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening once again, and we'll be back next week. So be sure to listen in. See you all next time.